It's Monday, and the next City Skylines 2 developer diary and feature highlight video have dropped, this time covering the economy and production. And though this is one of the longer and more technical diaries, it's a good one because it confirms that you'll be able to use the new economic simulation to really craft the story of your city. The TLDR version, the underlying simulation has been redesigned from the ground up and is said to be complex but not complicated. Starting a new city will be simpler because cities will receive subsidies that taper as the city becomes more self-sufficient. Citizens can now become homeless if insufficient housing is available for their income levels. Businesses will occasionally adjust production capacity in response to demand, which can result in either layoffs or hiring additional employees. The new production chain has 9 specialized industries, a huge increase over the 4 that came in City Skylines. And the economy panel is greatly improved and much more useful than in City Skylines. But there's a ton more to each of these topics, so in today's video, we'll deep dive into the developer diary, then we'll go over the feature highlight video to see what secrets we can decode, and I'll let you know my thoughts and reactions along the way. So let's dive into the developer diary, starting with the design philosophy. The diary begins by discussing the design philosophy for the game, explaining that the goal for Cities Skylines 2 was to create a game that was complex but not overly complicated. And I think this was a really wise place to start because this entire diary is very technical in nature and dives into some of the nuances of the simulation. But my takeaway is that this game will be approachable for newbies, especially at the start of the game, and have added complexity for seasoned vets, which I absolutely love. This game is designed to have an economy that will balance itself out in most cases, particularly at the start of a game. Newly founded cities will receive subsidies that take care of a portion of their expenses, helping to reduce some of the early game frustrations that were so often present in City Skylines. As the city grows, its economy will become more robust and self-sufficient, and the subsidies will decline and eventually phase out. And from that point, you'll be able to influence the economy as much or as little as you'd like, though exerting influence will help to determine the type of economy that your city will have. And I love this. City Skylines can be played in 2 ways. It can be a city painter or a deep management simulation. However, the latter has always been lacking in my opinion, and it seems like City Skylines 2 is trying to fix that. In City Skylines 2, you'll be able to paint a city by enabling unlimited money, you'll be able to play it without diving into the details for a more chilled out management simulation, or you'll be able to dive into the details and let the economy tell the story of your city, which I think is absolutely huge, and I love it. Next, the diary discusses the economic cycle. The economy in City Skylines 2 is formed by the flow of money and resources between households, businesses, and city services, all of which the diary calls agents. Each agent has money, resources, and expenses, and is currently attempting to meet its individual needs based on its current situation. And I'll be upfront with you, this all gets a bit complicated, but I'm going to attempt to summarize it fairly simply. Businesses and citizens have needs, preferences, and financial constraints that guide their decision making, and all of their choices are interconnected to some degree. Similar to City Skylines, taxes can be used to encourage or discourage certain types of businesses to locate within your community. However, you are now able to target this much more narrowly and can even provide subsidies or negative taxes to encourage specific industries to locate within your community. This is similar to what happens in real life when cities provide property tax assistance, free land, or tax increment financing to developers to bring desired uses to a community. So I love this. So let's break down the needs, preferences, and financial constraints for each agent type. So we'll begin with households. All households need housing and resources. They prefer to be close to workplaces, schools, leisure, and shopping to keep transportation costs low. And their finances are impacted by their income, travel costs, rent, and resource needs. Individual households will now go shopping for resources. They will choose products based on their personal preferences and travel to specific shops based on those preferences to make their purchases. Purchased goods will be transferred to a household's inventory. If the sum of housing, resource, and transportation costs are too high for a household relative to their income, they will seek other housing options that meet as many of their preferences as possible. However, if affordable housing isn't available, they will try to leave the city, and if they can't afford to do that, they may become homeless and live in your city's parks until their needs are met. Industrial companies, on the other hand, need access to resources, buyers for products, and workers. They prefer to maximize their profits by locating areas with low land value that helps to reduce the cost of their rent, reducing transportation costs by sourcing raw materials locally, and hiring employees at the right education level so as to maximize the efficiency and increase the overall profit margin. They also prefer to set up industries that are new to a city, if at all possible. As a company's finances improve, they're able to reinvest into their building, which increases the company level, the surrounding land value, and their overall production rate, and thus makes them more profitable. Companies will evaluate their current production rates from time to time in an effort to maximize their profits. When they do this, they will adjust the scale of their production to meet the current supply and demand for their products, either hiring more employees to keep up with demand or firing employees to stay profitable. If they are unable to become profitable, the company will go bankrupt and the building will become abandoned. Commercial companies need products to sell, workers to staff their shops, and customers. They prefer to maximize profits by locating close to their workforce and their customers, while also maintaining good connections to manufacturers. This means that commercial companies will often thrive near residential areas where their employees and customers live. Commercial companies have the same financial realities as industrial companies and will reinvest in their buildings to level up and adjust their workforces based on economic conditions. Interestingly, there are now additional reasons that a commercial company may locate in a specific area. Citizens now need a variety of resources and will travel to purchase them. If, for instance, there's a food desert or a neighborhood without a grocery store will be deemed a lucrative endeavor and make the development of a grocery store much more likely within the neighborhood. Lastly, office companies function essentially the same as industrial companies with a couple of adjustments. They need access to resources, buyers for products, and workers. However, because their resources are lightweight and the products they produce are immaterial and transmitted wirelessly, they are not as reliant on transportation connections. Because of this, they prefer to locate close to their workers, near residential areas. Office companies have the same fiscal realities as industrial and commercial companies and will scale production based on their economic situation. Similarly, they can go bankrupt if they are unable to post a profit. Interestingly, the diary states that large office buildings can now employ hundreds of employees. While this is still a far cry from reality, it's substantially more than was possible in city skylines and will likely lead to some interesting traffic issues during rush hours. The diary also discusses warehouses a bit in this section, basically saying that some industrial buildings will develop as warehouses that can store goods that are produced locally or that are imported from outside connections. These warehouses will try to stay stocked at all times, either with goods from local industry, from outside connection, or from other warehouses within the community. Now I'm going to be honest and say that I had to reread this section over and over to wrap my head around it, but I think the overall concept is pretty intuitive if you don't overthink it like I was. I really appreciate that City Skylines 2 appears to be encouraging and even rewarding mixed-use development. I also appreciate that homelessness is being brought into the game. It's an issue that cities are continually struggling with and is often one of the most pressing issues facing a city. It was a huge blind spot in City Skylines, and I really appreciate that it's being addressed in City Skylines 2. Now, one thing I am very interested in finding out more information about is household resource needs. It's very clear that citizens will prefer certain types of goods and that stores will be specialized in the types of goods that they sell. I'm very curious to know how many variations of goods there are and how much overlap there is between stores. I'm very excited to see this kind of mechanic in the game since it will add depth and realism to neighborhood design. Next, the diary discusses production. City Skylines 2 comes with a brand new production chain that is very reminiscent of the chain found within the industry's DLC. Having a complete production chain will yield a specialization bonus to companies found within the chain, improving their overall efficiency. Thankfully, production chains have been designed so that you can be as involved as you wish. You can either take a hands-off approach or micromanage the entire system for maximum efficiency. Supply chains begin with raw materials, which can either be imported or extracted locally within a specialized industry area. To create an extraction area, place a specialized industry hub, and then create a specialized industry area attached to that hub, which works the exact same way as the district tool. This area can expand, but it must remain within range of the main industry hub building. If these areas are producing more resources than a city can utilize, excess material will automatically be sold to outside connections. However, profits from these sales will be lower than if the materials were utilized locally due to the increased transportation costs. Resources now have 3 production factors that will influence the logistics of specific supply chains, including price, weight, and space. These factors influence resource availability, transportation costs, and the amount of space manufacturing will take up. Speaking of manufacturing, raw materials are processed into material goods that can be sold either to other manufacturers for further processing, exported to outside connections, or sold to commercial companies. Commercial companies will sell these goods to citizens, which will fulfill their leisure and resource demands. The same supply chain holds true for offices, which act as manufacturers of immaterial goods. As mentioned in the 4th developer diary, immaterial goods can either be sold to other offices in the form of software, to citizens in the form of media, or exported to outside connections. Next, the diary discusses specialized industries. There are 9 specialized industries within City Skylines 2, including livestock farming and stone mining, which require no natural resources. Grain, vegetable, and cotton farms, which require fertile land. Forestry, which requires a forest. Coal and ore mining, which require ore deposits. And oil drilling, which requires oil. Oil and ore deposits are finite, while fertile land and forests replenish over time but are susceptible and vulnerable to pollution. These specialized industries will spawn specialized industry vehicles that operate within their industrial area boundaries. However, these do not operate on normal roads, but rather will drop resources off at the main building and just generally look pretty cool. And finally, specialized industries do not impact industrial demand, and specialized industry areas cannot go bankrupt. Instead, they'll adjust production and thus the number of employees they have when profits are down or when natural resources run out. I absolutely love that the number of industries has been expanded, and I really can't wait to see the full spectrum of businesses available within City Skylines 2, because I have a feeling there's going to be a ton of them. But I am concerned about the lack of information about resource depletion. Please just give me the ability to turn it off altogether. I really don't love this mechanic. I didn't like it in City Skylines 1. You spend a whole bunch of time setting up one of these areas only to have the resources run out. So I'm really hoping we get to turn this off, even though it isn't the height of realism. And lastly, the guide dives into the economy panel. The economy panel has been greatly improved and should be much more useful when trying to get a handle on your city's finances. The budget tab provides a quick view of your city's revenue and expenses, as well as its monthly balance. The loans tab provides information about the loans available to your city or about loans that it's already taken out. In City Skylines 2, only one loan is ever available, but it is adjustable and can be repaid or increased at any time. The maximum loan amount available to you increases at each milestone, and the interest rate is variable based upon the size of the loan. The interest rate can be reduced by building a city hall and a central bank, both of which were discussed in Dev Diary 5, City Services. The taxation tab allows for the adjustment of taxes for individual zones, as well as fine-grained adjustments, which have changed considerably since City Skylines. For instance, residential zones can now have their tax rates adjusted by education levels. Commercial, industrial, and office zones can now have their tax rates adjusted based on the type of product they produce. Taxes can now range from negative 10% to 30%, with a negative tax rate acting as a subsidy to incentivize a specific industry or demographic to locate within your city. The Services tab provides budgets for city services. This remains mostly unchanged from City Skylines with one major exception. Citizens and businesses are now charged service fees for water and power, and those fees can be adjusted within this menu. As was previously mentioned, service fees can impact company efficiency and citizen happiness and have a direct impact on overall service consumption. And finally, we have the Production tab, which provides an overview of your city's production chains, including the amount of raw materials and goods being produced and the revenue being generated by them. Further, it shows the full supply chain for each good, which we'll dive into as part of the feature highlight video. Generally, I really like the way the new economy panel is laid out. Information is clear and concise, and where possible, it seems like it's been simplified. And I love this because I always thought the economy panel in City Skylines was a bit difficult to understand, and I really tried to avoid it as a result. I'm also a big fan of the changes to loans. It feels like what we're getting is much more dynamic, and it removes some unnecessary noise from the game. I never really understood why we had 3 loans, just give me one that I can change. But I do have some mixed feelings about the changes to taxes. While I understand from a game mechanic perspective why residential taxes are now tied to educational level, it feels a bit unrealistic and unnatural. That said, I love that we now have more control over commercial taxes based upon specific product types. This will allow for greater control of the industries and commercial companies that locate within your city, which means that we are going to have greater control over the story of our city, which I'm always in favor of. And before we move on to my final thoughts, let's take a look at the feature highlight video. We're going to begin right here about 25 seconds into the video, and we get to see where our city economy button is. It's right about here. And then as we click that, we get our view of our economy panel. So we have our taxes. That's obviously the combination of all of our taxes across all of our use categories. And then we have our service fees. So those are the service fees that we're generating from things like garbage collection, selling water and power to our Sims. Then we have our service trade here, selling power and water to outside communities. And then our government subsidies, which we now know are in place because as you start a city, you receive government subsidies to kind of offset the difficulty that you have in the beginning when you don't have much industry, when you don't have many taxes, you get government subsidies. And then as your city grows and as you stand on your own, those subsidies begin to decline. And as you become a larger city, they disappear altogether. Right now, New Dollarton in this video has a population of approximately 65,000, which is why there are still some subsidies coming in. Interesting to see that we'll see them this late in the game. That said, we know that 141,000 especially over the course of a month, isn't a lot in City Skylines. Then we get to our expenses and we have subsidies again. And I speculated in the previous video that the expense form of subsidies would actually be subsidies that would give to certain land use categories to incentivize them coming into your city. And we have confirmation that that is indeed a thing with negative taxes. So very happy to see that in the game. Obviously, New Dollarton isn't taking advantage of that right now, which is completely fine. but I can see trying to incentivize certain industries or even certain types of housing to be built in your community, and you provide the subsidies to make that happen. Then we have our service upkeep. That's pretty normal stuff. Upkeep for roads, upkeep for garbage, healthcare, etc. And then we have our service trade expenses. So what we're seeing here is that New Dollarton is selling some sort of service but not buying any. And then we have our loan interest, which we'll dive into in more detail down the line. But basically, we're not seeing any loans right now. And then we get this nice, easy to understand monthly balance. If we keep everything where it's at, we will have about $500,000 more in our bank account at the end of the month. This is so easy to understand, and it's really laid out in a way that is really intuitive. I know how to increase this amount if I want to, or decrease it if I don't want to run such a massive surplus. I can maybe give some people some tax cuts and improve the city faster. So really, really love what we're seeing here. The other thing that I love seeing, New Dollarton is in the positive. I think this is the first time that we've seen that, and everyone's really happy as a result. And then as we make our way to the next menu, the mouse moves around a bit and we get to see a couple of these side panels. The first one that we see is service trade. And the couple of things I want to zero in on here, it's talking a bit about the services that can be traded. We see right here that we have exported electrical and exported water. These must be the two connections that we have. And right here, this money is 100% from exported electricity. Now, the interesting thing to me is they're talking about healthcare services and vacancies in schools being filled in. I don't know if we will actually get money from that, but that's something I'm going to be very interested in because I'm not sure why it would be mentioned here if you couldn't gain revenue from that. And for a split second, we get to see our service fees, and this shines some light on what those fees are. We've got parking fees, electricity fees, water fees, garbage fees, healthcare fees, education fees, and public transport fees. And then we get this brief description of taxes. Low taxes encourage people to move into your city. They'll make companies more successful. This is likely because they have more profit. Also, the opposite is true as well. High taxes will bring in more money, but will drive citizens away. They will cut into company profits, and they will also make building leveling slower since there's less money to reinvest, which I think is really interesting. And that there is some truth to that. It makes me think back to the start of the pandemic when people were at home a whole bunch. They were canceling trips and canceling things that they were planning on doing outside of their homes. And what that meant for planners is we were seeing a whole bunch of people invest in their homes. People were pouring money into their homes because they had extra money. So to me, this feels incredibly realistic. Now we're going to look at our taxation screen, and there's just a couple of interesting things to point out here. First of all, I think we're getting trolled a bit. We've got 12% here for commercial, industrial, and office, and 12% was the magic tax rate in City Skylines. The most you could do, you probably should set it there. Your city won't be impacted too much by it, and you'll generate as much tax revenue as you can. Now, I don't think that's the case in City Skylines 2. It makes it seem like things will balance out and find an equilibrium. No matter where you have it, there'll be consequences and benefits for setting it in any single way, but I do find that to be really interesting. And now we get to see some of those individual tax rates that I was just talking about. So we have the industrial tax rates here, and interestingly, we're seeing the different goods that I think people might be interested in purchasing as well. So we're seeing that there's convenience food, furniture, grain, paper, timber, vegetables, vehicles, and electronics. So I mentioned earlier on in the video that every sim is going to have an inventory, or every citizen rather is going to have an inventory. I'm guessing that these are some of the categories that they might be interested in fulfilling for their households. So they might want vegetables, they might want convenience food such as a corn dog. I don't know, they might want those different things and fill their inventory with those. Now, you can choose whether you're producing those locally by adjusting your tax rates. And you saw as soon as this tax rate for this was lowered, we got the range right here. And then here we're taking a look at some of our specialized industries. And I have a sneaking suspicion that this is an ore industry, and I think it's probably 3 separate industries. The reason I think that is we've got buildings right here that look the same, guessing that's the main building. And then there was some discussion in the developer diary about needing to keep within a certain radius of that main industry building. Now, I don't know if these have to be touching if you create a big industry area or if they can be separated by a road. I'm guessing they have to be touching, but we will have to see, wait and find out. We're also seeing that it's terraforming up the side of a hill here. There are some challenges here, it looks like. Hopefully some of those get resolved. Also some lower quality textures. That's been pointed out a number of times in the comments. Totally get it. Have to remember we're still looking at beta, but we're getting some really interesting stuff here. And honestly, the build that we're looking at today looks a ton better than some of the most recent videos that we've seen in the past couple of weeks. I think that this looks pretty darn good. We're also seeing a couple of vehicles right here. Mentioned in the dev diary that there are some industry-specific vehicles that will operate on paths within the specialized industry areas, and those are some of those vehicles. Those will not go on the road, but they will pick up materials from the extractor and take it right to the main building. And the longer I look at this, the more I do think this is 3 separate areas. We've got a large extractor right here, another kind of extractor right here, and then maybe an underground mine right here. So I think that this is indeed 3 different ore areas. This is just some B-roll of a building, but I want to point out the name on the building, Leto Electronics. So this should sound familiar to you. This has actually been with City Skylines from the very beginning. So Leto Electronics inside of the Industries DLC is the name of the big factory, the big electronics factory. With the new Skyscrapers Content Creator Pack, there were 2 different Leto Electronics buildings at different sizes that you could have. And originally with City Skylines, as part of the original soundtrack, it is the song that gets played when you kill your city. So it's interesting to see that all the connections to City Skylines in here. I love their sense of humor. I love their sense of building upon the past, and here's just an example of that. Now we zoom forward a little ways and we see this bridge getting built, and that is the main part of the shot, and I really like the way this animates, but I want to point out this as well. It looks like we have some transportation facilities underground or some water underground. I think it's transportation right here. Right here is maybe an underground power line. So we're able to see this because we're looking at our transportation view, which is now transportation plus utilities. So very interesting to see that. And then we get this view right here of what I believe to be a university, and just look at that football field. That looks outstanding. So much detail. Looks a ton better than anything we had in the base game before. I'm really hoping that this Chirper Stadium is not a part of the university. I'm really deeply hoping we can place this all over the place because I will use it all over the place. It also makes me think that I'm sure we're going to see a mod that's going to allow us to take certain parts of these modular buildings and place them individually, and I am here for it. It's one of the mods I'll pick up right away because the modular parts of these buildings just look so good. This is kind of unrelated to anything, but I just want to marvel at the forest and how dense it is. This is something that wasn't really seen in a vanilla City Skylines game. You could do this if you had the unlimited trees mod, but your performance would suffer. Really interested in seeing how the frame rate is impacted by this many trees. It seems like it's handling it just fine on a beta build, which I think is really impressive. So I am very, very keen on seeing how this works in the finished game. But it looks outstanding right now. And now we get a quick look at our workplace availability info view. And we have 2 things here. We get this pie chart that kind of breaks down the employees in the city relative to their workplace distribution. So we're seeing that most of the employees in the city are educated. This is not showing the actual need. On the right-hand side is the overall need for workers. And then here's what we actually have for workers. And on the pie chart, it looks like we're actually seeing the worker breakdown of our city. So that's one piece of information. And then the second one is the overall workplaces on the terrain itself. So the darker the green, the more workplaces are concentrated in a specific area. So this right here must be the central business district. Very high concentration of workplaces. And now we get a quick view of our outside connection info view, which shows our top imports and exports. So this is really interesting because it gives us a view of some of those material and immaterial goods that were referenced in the dev diary. So we looked at all of the material goods before, and these are what we're importing in New Dollarton. And then the exports are things like financial services, telecom, media. So I would say that this has an economy that is very similar to New York City or cities like that, maybe London, where financial services, telecommunications, media, and software are the top exports. And they're importing things like food and manufactured goods that maybe they aren't producing in this city. So very interesting to see that you can see that specialization here right in this menu. And then we get back to our economy screen and our taxation, and we get to see some of these more of these material goods. So now we see that we have metals, crude oil, metal ore, petrochemicals, plastics, wood, coal, all things that we can tax individually, all things that we can produce in our cities. And then we sell goods at our commercial stores. So I think these are things that people can actually buy. Again, that's the convenience food, furniture, lodging, meals, paper, vehicles, electronics, plastics, chemicals, pharmaceuticals, all things that have been referenced to, but now we get to see it all plainly laid out. And holy cow, look at the amount of money being made on vehicles. Obviously, that is a focus of the economy in the city, vehicles. And as a result, the tax revenue from vehicles is huge. And it's interesting, then we get to see what's happening with our industrial industry here, and we can see that the vehicle tax rates are super low. So obviously the goal here was to lower the cost of producing vehicles, and then a whole bunch gets sold here as a result. And that would make that one of the specialized industries of this city. Very cool. Now, a couple of interesting things here. The point of this shot was to show that they were able to create a really specialized furniture industry in New Dollarton. But I want to focus on one other thing. We see that as they hover over this building, it actually says a news interior design. That's the signage on the outside too, which is super cool. And as we go through, they're going to click on some other buildings. We see it showing up here in the menu that's talking about it. It sells furniture. So we know that this is what this specialized good is. So people who are looking for furniture would commute to this sort of a building. And then here we have Kappa, which also sells furniture. And look at this right on the side of the building, a gigantic mural for Kappa. That is an attention to detail. This must also be a Kappa furniture. Now, I'm going to take just a shot in the dark and say that's something that we're going to be able to get from the workshop, that people are going to be able to create our companies. So we're going to be able to see full company sets where you're able to download the factory, the store that sells the good, and it'll be a whole set of that factory. And I'm really here to see that. I think it's going to be really fun to see what people come up with. I could also see people producing real stores. Imagine the software company like Microsoft, for instance, and then a Microsoft store selling some of the electronics that Microsoft produces inside of their stores. So very, very cool to see all of this level of detail worked into the game. The possibilities here are endless. Here we're seeing our natural resource availability, and I really love to see one thing here. We're seeing that we have our available resource and our utilization per month. So we should be able to do a simple math equation to figure out exactly how long our ore would last. So if we can't turn off depletion, this will make me at least a little bit happier because we can make that projection out to see how long our resources would last. One interesting thing in this shot, so this is their oil industry, and I'm seeing a ton of truck traffic. So we haven't seen a ton of traffic in the city, and now here we're seeing a lot. And this is something I'm curious about because this has been a thing. Especially with the Industries DLC, you would see these specialized areas spawning just kind of ridiculous amounts of truck traffic. So I'm going to keep an eye on that. I'm very curious to see if this is a beta thing or if that's kind of by design. But I'm hoping that there's a little bit less truck traffic or the vehicles are more full. We'll have to see. Either way, it worked fine in City Skylines with the Industries DLC. It's just one of those things that kind of breaks the immersion for me, but it's not that big of a deal. Then we're going to look at our production menu, and I love this menu. So we're seeing our current production of each of our resources, and then we're seeing our surplus or deficit of each of those. So if we have a surplus, we know that we're just exporting the raw material to outside connections. So with ore, for instance, we might not want to do that because that means that we are depleting our natural resource and selling it at the lowest possible dollar amount that we could. So we might want to cut back on our production there. And if we have deficits, we might want to produce more of this locally to increase our company profits. It's great to see it laid out so easily here. It should be fairly easy to figure out when we're placing our industry areas exactly the amount of tonnage that we're creating in those areas. So it should make management of those areas very, very simple. And then as they go through this menu, they hover over some of our production chains. So we see that if you have a forestry industry, you could either import the wood or build it or get it yourself. Then you can process this into heating or into timber or export the raw wood. Same thing here, take agricultural products, feed it to your livestock, process it into a variety of things. It looks like food, textiles, or even convenience food, or just export livestock. Vegetables we can process into food, or I'm guessing juice, or export it. Cotton, which we can turn into textiles or export it. We can drill, get crude oil, produce petroleum or chemicals. We can mine for metal ore. That's what this is, metal ore. So we have two different types of ore. And then produce steel or export it. Or we can mine for coal specifically, produce electricity, or turn it into, I'm guessing, steel along with that metal ore. And then we get to take, and then some of our material goods we can produce with metals. It looks like vehicles, steel, or gears, I'm guessing. Maybe parts. We have steel, which does take, it looks like, metal plus coal. And then you can turn the steel into gears or parts. You can take stone, turn it into minerals, and turn that into electronics or chemicals. You can take stone and turn it into concrete, which goes towards either upkeep or just exporting it. And then I want to poke a little bit of fun for just a second. So we talked about the smoke just a bit ago. If you look at this, it looks like the tires here are smoking instead of maybe the grinding here. Just a beta thing. Some things that just gotta make you chuckle. These are the sorts of things that get fixed. We shouldn't look into them too much, but you gotta have a quick laugh when you can, because that's really funny to see that we have it smoking from the tires. Now here we're seeing 3 farms, and it looks like you're able to reuse fences, which is great because that means you can create some mega farm districts, which is something I am super interested in doing. So that's the main thing for me. I want to be able to create really immersive rural environments. That was always something that was lacking a bit in City Skylines. And it seems like with these, we're gonna be able to create those. Again, all of this is gonna come down to truck traffic. I talked a little bit about that. These don't seem to be producing as much truck traffic. You don't see any, and I love that. Oh, and I've got to poke fun again. We have a digger here, and it looks like it's about to blow. It is smoking like crazy. I think that's hilarious. So now we're seeing our budgets being adjusted here. Nothing earth-shattering, but as I looked at this, a couple of things that stuck out to me. We're looking at healthcare, and we're seeing the fees, and I'm really curious about what the fees are all about here, if that's like a copay. But it seems like a very insignificant amount relative to our expenses. But I'm interested in this because we're seeing that green is at 150%. That seems off to me. I'm very curious to see if this is going to be changed. It seems as though this should go green in the middle. Honestly, if a government can have a fully funded anything, that's awesome. Most of the time, you're not going to see that. So if you were able to fund something 150%, that should be like blue or something. I'm also noticing a reset button here, which is a nice quality of life improvement. I don't know if you've experienced this, but there have been so many times that I've been adjusting the budget and then I want to get back to 100% and I just can't. I hit 99, I hit 101, and I just kind of keep going back and forth trying to get it. It was frustrating and unnecessarily so, and it looks like now it's easy enough to hit this button and reset it. And then we're going to take a look at our loan screen, and you see that right now the interest rate is 0, and that's because there is no loan. But as we increase the amount of our loan and thus our risk, the interest rate goes up. And this is really interesting to me because it's kind of similar to reality. If the more risky a loan is, the higher the interest rate is, because the lending institution wants more coverage and protection for themselves. Now, what I really love about this menu is that it's telling us the trouble that we're about to run into in the future. If we take out this loan, we are going to only have a remaining surplus of $300,000 a month, which sounds really, really good, but apparently it's not. So as this increases and as the loan increases, we start to see the warning lights get bigger and bigger and bigger. Now we have a deficit. If we take out this loan, we're going to be in a bad place. Now, you might want to do that. You might know that whatever you're going to buy with this loan is going to offset that expense and make your city more profitable. But it's great that it's giving you some warnings up front rather than after you've already made the mistake. So that's great to see. And now for my final thoughts. I absolutely love the changes that have been made to the economic simulation for City Skylines 2. It seems like Colossal Order has walked a tightrope. They've made the game both more accessible for newbies while providing veteran players a more in-depth gameplay experience. Honestly, I'm quite impressed. The ability to micro-target taxes and subsidies means that you're going to be able to craft a detailed story and narrative for your city, which I absolutely love. And the new supply chains, while easy to understand and fairly straightforward, appear to have the potential for more depth and expandability than those found in the industry's DLC. And generally, it seems like the game is going to satisfy players looking for a more in-depth management simulation without ruining it for more casual players. But what do you think about the new economy and production mechanics? Let me know down in the comments. Or if you're bashful, consider dropping your favorite emoji for the sake of engagement. And hit the like button if you've enjoyed this video. Thanks again for joining me on another one of these deep dives. Remember, we're doing this every Monday until Cities Skylines 2 comes out. Thank you so much for joining me today. I can't wait to see you in the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.